Hello and welcome to Taiwan Talks. I'm Ika Vat. Floods and landslides have devastated parts of India and Bangladesh, which has suffered around 60 deaths in the worst floods in living memory. In India, 170 people at least have died since floods started in June. 11 Bangladeshi districts were inundated, with reports saying the homes of more than 1 million people were submerged, while a further 6 million were impacted. While this was a natural disaster, some Bangladeshis blame officials in India. They say water was released from India's Dumbur dam in neighbouring Tripura state with no warning. New Delhi said this is factually incorrect. The flood in Bangladesh is due to the heaviest rains of the year, which triggered automatic releases. As extreme weather events multiply and global freshwater supplies run low, we ask how water is contributing to geopolitical tensions. With us to discuss this are Ping Kui, National Zhengzhou University Department of Diplomacy Professor, and Sana Hashmi, Taiwan Asia Exchange Foundation Postdoctoral Fellow. A very warm welcome to both of you on the show today. The Tibetan Plateau, standing at 4,500 meters in elevation, is the main source of Asia's 10 major river systems. Annexed by China in 1951, Tibet alone harbours the largest reserve of fresh water outside the North and South Polar regions. It supplies water for approximately 20% of the world's population. The Brahmaputra River is one of the longest rivers in the world. Its upper reaches, known as the Yarlung-Tsangpo River, originate in Tibet. After entering India, it is called the Brahmaputra River, providing about 30% of India's freshwater resources. The river flows through Bangladesh before emptying into the Bay of Bengal, making it a lifeline for those downstream countries. Sana, let me come to you first. So let's go back to the flooding in Bangladesh. How bad was it for a country that is very used to flooding?
I think it's very unfortunate and tragic, specifically if you look at the timing. Now there is interim government in place, and now dozens of people have died, millions have been displaced. So I think, and also there's a concern for waterborne diseases. So then now the interim government is in place. The question is how they're going to deal with the economic woes. So I definitely feel, and also they have to establish relationship with the neighboring countries, particularly India, which is traditionally considered closer to Hasina's government. So I don't think it's going to be easy for the interim government how to rehabilitate the people and how to address the economic woes that comes out of the natural disaster.
So Sana mentioned some of the tensions there, Professor Chen. How do you see this incident sort of rekindling these tensions between the two countries?
I think this thing happens in a very bad time. Of course, like Sana says, the tension between two countries is very high right now. So anything happens in Bangladesh can be blamed on India. So this time when the Indian official explains why they cannot contact the Bangladesh officials about releasing the water, they might be right that power outage can cause the delays. But so the intention matters, right? We cannot know whether India do this for accidentally or on purpose. However, what is important is what Bangladesh people think about it. So if most Bangladesh people believe that India purposefully tried to release water, no matter whether it contributes to the flooding, it is a very bad sign, right? So what happens right now, I think there are a lot of misinformation about it. For example, in the beginning of the news, people are saying that the dam was very close to the border, but actually it's 120 kilometers away from the border. Secondly, we also see the flooding in the Tripura state of India, which is the upstream area. So the flooding is go to India and Bangladesh at the same time.
But that comes on top of, as we said, so the tensions between the two countries, but also in terms of water, perhaps water sharing or the water agreements. Can you tell us a little bit about, perhaps some of the grievances that the Bangladeshis have towards India?
In terms of water resources. So in South Asia, water is a very precious resource, not because they are very scarce, because they don't come in the right time. Sometimes it rains very heavily, so it causes flooding, but during the dry season, the water won't be enough for both countries. So India has water agreements or treaties with neighboring countries such as Pakistan and also Bangladesh. So these agreements are supposed to arrange the water flow to each country during different seasons. In dry season, in raining season, they have different regulations. And they have regulations such as communicating whether you want to release the water or not. So water management become a very important diplomatic issue between these countries. Now, but I have to add that flooding during the rainy season is pretty common in South Asia, especially in Bangladesh, because Bangladesh is relatively low and it has cyclones. So cyclones can cause heavy raining and flood the shore. And this time, there are more provinces and districts are being flooded.
One of the quotes that was in the infamous CNN article about this topic, and this was one of the Bangladeshis said, India used water as a weapon to take revenge for destroying the last government.
But it's not India's policy to use water as a weapon. Because if you look at it, and if you specifically compare it with China, a riparian country in the region, India has actually water sharing agreements with Pakistan, with Nepal, and with Bangladesh as well. Of course, Teesta water treaty is under negotiation and it will take some time. But apart from that, Ganges water treaty is very much there. And Mahakali with Nepal as well. So it's not that India is not negotiating, India is not sharing the data, and India has always believed in equitable distribution of hydrological resources.
I mean, from the Bangladeshi point of view, before we move to China, from their point of view that they don't consider those water sharing agreements to be fair. For example, the Ganges water sharing agreement.
I think India definitely shares hydrological data, and I feel that it's a major issue. It's a diplomatic issue, and it's much beyond. I don't think that India is involved in this petty kind of revenge thing that, you know, because Sheikh Hasina is in there, so we have to release the water. I do believe that South Asia is one of the most porous regions, and as Professor Shan also mentioned that how it is so vulnerable to flooding, cyclones. So I do understand that India is also facing the same issues as Bangladesh.
And so it remains to be seen what the interim government perhaps can negotiate on Bangladesh's behalf. Professor Chen, you wanted to jump in?
So I just want to add that using water as a weapon is a very uncertain one, right? If you release water upstream, it does not necessarily cause flooding in downstream areas. It may also hurt yourself. So it's hard to imagine that Indian government would use this strategy to purposefully try to hurt Bangladeshi people.
I mean, negligence was also another accusation,
right?
Probably a lesser,
exactly.
lesser accusation. Okay, so in a 1952 speech, Mao Zedong declared, "Dams are the key to the development of our country. They will help us to control floods, generate electricity, and irrigate our fields. They will also help us to improve transportation and communication. We must build dams on all of our major rivers." Professor Chen, how has the PRC heeded this call by Mao Zedong? If we can, talk about the scale of China's dam building.
So since Mao Zedong's period, China has been building dams all over the country. It has over 90,000 dams over there, and most of them concentrate on the Hubei province. So these dams provide irrigation, anti-flooding, and also hydropower. So China has a very good experience building dams, and they are building mega dams, which are very high, very tall, very big dams right now. So China still holds the record of building the highest dam in the world.
Right, okay. And San, I mean, how would that compare to, say, India's dam building? Is it anywhere close to 90,000?
It's definitely nothing in comparison to China. China has the most extensive and ambitious plan. India is definitely, I would say that it would come on one of the top countries that is building dam and that has very ambitious, extensive dam project. But I do feel that it's way, way behind China. And I don't think that it wants to be in the league of China. Because for India, and if you look at the potential of hydrological electricity, it's just 50 gigawatt for India, whereas it's 370 for China. So look at the gap even in terms of what China has been doing with its dam. But apart from that, while China has large-scale, extensive projects, India is at a very small level. It's a very smaller scale. And India's main objective is for irrigation and flood control.
Professor Chen, you mentioned huge dams. Now, the biggest to date, we know, is being constructed on the Yarlang Sampo River just before it enters Indian territory, Arunachal Pradesh. And this apparently will have a capacity that's 3 times that of the Three Gorges Dam, which is currently China's largest dam. What will be the impact of this for downstream?
So if we look at the Three Strait Gorge, the power station example, we know that it will cause the shortage of water and the change to the ecosystem downstream. So basically the fishing and the underwater ecosystem will change. And the amount of water flow may change too. But it depends on how China will manage the dam, how China would regulate the water flow.
How about their record so far? What does that point to?
The best record we have right now is what China did along the Mekong area, right? So the record, I would say, is not pretty good, pretty impressive. So it is reasonable to worry that for Indians, India will worry that China, after building this mega dam, it may affect the northeast province, especially Arunachal Pradesh.
Right. And Sana, what other concerns would New Delhi have? We talked about the tensions between India and Bangladesh. I mean, those tensions are probably even higher between India and China. So what does it mean for India that China can exert such control over this sort of life supply, water?
I think some of the major concerns are very basic about the water availability, specifically to the northeast. We have been talking about the environmental impact of China's dam building on Tibet, on neighboring countries for a very, very long time. And I think the concern with India is that, for example, India and South Asian countries do have some institutional framework, some treaties. But with China, there are no official framework, there are no official treaties. There are agreements to share hydrological data, but I think it's also on the whims and fancies of China. And then after Doklam standoff, China stopped sharing data. So I think it's just on the basis of goodwill. So it's just not about the availability of basic resources, it's also about natural disasters. So I think definitely India, Bangladesh, and even other countries in the region are at the behest of China and whatever China wants to do with respect to hydrological resources.
Let's take a look again at the major rivers in Asia, originating from the Tibetan Plateau. China has plans for, already completed, more than a dozen dams on the Mekong River, which flows through Laos, Thailand and Cambodia. So according to think tank the Stimson Center, in 2019, China's dams in the upper Mekong River basin retained a record amount of water. And yet, despite experiencing above average rainfall that wet season, countries along the Thai-Lao border of the Mekong faced an unprecedented drought. So, Sana, this is probably the biggest example, isn't it, that is shown of China's power to effectively turn on or turn off the tap.
There are satellite imageries, and when countries try to negotiate and talk to China, they just deny that they are not involved in this huge, expansive dam building. But we have been seeing at least since the late 2000s that China has been involved in that. Then China hasn't really used it as a weapon, I would say, because I feel that they're not even accepting it, so how they're going to use it as a weapon as of now. But I do feel that in times to come, it's definitely going to be one of the biggest weapons against countries such as India, specifically. So also China is not really willing to negotiate an agreement. What China has been doing, and I think it's just not the case with the water, but also with other aspects. Look at the border, there are some kind of preliminary agreements. But when it comes to resolving the issues, be it the border, be it conventional, non-conventional issues, China's approach has remained the same. There is no track 1.5 or track 1 dialogue dealing with the dam building, dealing with the sharing of hydrological resources. So what China has been doing till now is just to sharing of hydrological data for perhaps flood management, that's all. We haven't really received anything else from China.
From your perspective, Professor Chen, looking not just at India, but also those other downstream rivers of the Mekong, downstream countries along the Mekong, how do they see China? Do they see China as weaponizing water?
It differs, actually. The difficulty of water resources management politics is that every country sits in a different position. So in the Mekong River area, so downstream country like Vietnam suffers the most, right? Because the Mekong ends in Vietnam. So the fishermen and the fishing resources and the water, the amount of water Vietnam can get was smallest. But for a little bit upstream countries such as Laos, it didn't affect them too much. So Laos didn't have disputes with China, but Vietnam and Cambodia, sometimes Cambodia and sometimes Thailand had a little bit issue with what China have done in the upstream area. Right. So which makes the Mekong Cooperation Council a very difficult cooperation. And we have seen some failures, but sometimes we have seen some communication and progress. It's a very difficult cooperation process. And sometimes, like Sana said, China does not really cooperate.
Right. And so do you see that as water becomes more scarce, you know, that these troubles will intensify?
Yeah, it will. Actually, according to the Stimson Center data you just mentioned, they have been tracking Mekong River area systematically for years. I think the project is over 4 years old. So they collect a very good, very substantial data on Mekong River flow. And it does indicate that the flow of Mekong River is gradually decreased every year.
Right. So that's highly critical then, given that these countries rely on that supply for their livelihoods, Sana.
Absolutely. As in, I feel that China is still kind of proactive or open to negotiation and talks to Southeast Asian countries, lower riparian countries of Southeast Asia. You have sub-regional groupings to deal with it, but we don't know how effective those sub-groupings have been. So, but I do believe that if you compare China's approach towards South Asia, particularly India, and China's approach to lower riparian countries in Southeast Asia is totally different. But if you look at India's approach, India also has sub-regional groupings such as Mekong-Ganga Cooperation, BIMSTEC. It was primarily aimed at managing water resources. But we do not see anything like that coming from China, not with respect to Bangladesh or India.
Okay. Professor Chen, so turning to China itself in terms of problems related to dams, you know, as we heard in the Mao quote, dams were meant to be the primary sort of guard against flooding. Is there any link to China's over-reliance, if we can call it that, on dams and the severity of some of these flood events in China itself?
So recently, especially in the past 3-4 years, we have seen China have a lot of flooding events, which didn't happen in history. If you look at the historical record, these floodings along the Yangtze River only happen in recent years. Right. So is that a result of building dams? Maybe that's one of the factors. But a very important factor that we can identify is that many dams along the Yangtze River are pretty old. So when heavy rain hits, the local officials will have to release the water to protect the dam
from completely collapse.
Yes.
Right.
So that's why it contributes to the Dongting Lake flooding this year.
Right. Yeah, and because there were the accusations from local Sana, local Chinese, complaining that they were not given adequate warning for those releases.
Absolutely, and I don't think, and I feel, as Professor Chen mentioned, that it's just not that the neighboring countries are suffering. China also suffered, and we keep hearing natural disasters hitting China and Tibet, as well as in earthquake, floods. It's such a common thing that we keep hearing from China that it's happening. So definitely we don't know if the dam building is the primary cause of it, but definitely it's one of the major contributory factors behind the increase in natural disasters in China.
Yeah, and absolutely, Professor Chen, Sana's point there about earthquakes, there's also a link, isn't there, between dam building and earthquakes and the disasters that can trigger?
Yeah, we know that blocking a large body of water actually can shift the weight of the earth, right? So there are studies saying that the Three Strait Gorge dam actually can slow down, can change the Earth's rotation. There are research about it.
Yeah.
So this will cause this is this really linked to the earthquake? I think we need more evidence of that.
Okay, now let's turn to Tibet. So China's mega dam that we spoke about is located at Pamako, considered Tibet's most sacred site, religious site, and it is known as a biol, a place where the physical and spiritual worlds overlap. So Sana, if I can ask you, do you believe that this site is the most suitable for this huge mega dam's construction, or is there a little bit of political motivation?
Absolutely not. As in Tibet is called the roof of the world. It's not the place where China should build dams, but China has been building dams for a very, very long time. And Tibetans, specifically in India and across the globe, they have been warning that there are environmental implications. And we are also seeing, look at the climate change and the thing that we are experiencing now. And there are issues that are connected with dam building in Tibet. So I don't think that it's a very suitable choice for China. But, it's just not about controlling water resources in Tibet or producing hydroelectricity. It's also about controlling Tibet. Dam building, it's also politically motivated. If you have developed infrastructure in Tibet, that actually means that Tibet is in China's control. Even after 5 decades, China is still insecure about Tibet. And dam building is definitely one of the ways of consolidating China's claim on Tibet.
Yeah. Further to that, Professor Chen, the Tibetans consider this construction is basically desecrating its most holy site. What it is to control Tibet, what impact does it have on Tibetans?
I think it will further Chinese control in Tibet, that's for sure. These places are called Pimlico for a reason, because Pimlico literally means lotus land, which means the natural spirits lives, right? So entering these valleys, you should respect the nature, and you should not disrupt the nature. That's why it is considered sacred land. It is not like Holy Land in Christianity or Islam, but it is a place where Tibetan and Sherpas believe that it is peaceful and you should not disturb it. So that's why we have a lot of criticism from the Tibetan community. But I do think this is a very effective control to previously no-man area, right? No man would be able to live in that area before, but right now, because of the construction, there will be more people moving in, and Chinese government can have more effective control, and it is close to Arunachal Pradesh.
All right, and Sana, just going back again to that religious and spiritual importance of that site, is kind of breaking the spirit, isn't it, of the Tibetans?
Absolutely, and as Professor Chen also mentioned, it's a no man's land. And then it's also about getting more Han Chinese to Tibet Autonomous Region so that it becomes more Han Chinese and then there are less Tibetans.
So a final question, Professor Chen. You mentioned about the Mekong River Commission, and this is between Cambodia, Laos, Thailand and Vietnam, and they have continually called on China to join or to interact.
Right.
Do you think that this is a solution for India and also the other downstream countries such as Bangladesh, is rather to focus on a bilateral, say like water sharing between countries, is to have these sort of like more multi or regional groupings?
From the experience of Mekong River Commission, I would say it was not very efficient. I think it is in India's best interest if it can hold bilateral negotiation with China and another bilateral negotiation with Bangladesh as well. So I think it's in India's best interest to play a little bit and try to, but it is important for India to get regional countries, now not just Bangladesh, but also Bhutan and Nepal, to urge China's construction in the upstream area. And this diplomatic pressure may not actually change China's behavior, but it will bring reputation pressure to China.
Right. And Sana, final words to you. Putting yourself or ourselves in Bangladesh's position, it may benefit from, rather from a bilateral arrangement with India, more of this sort of like regional with multiple partners in there, because actually China does support Bangladesh and has offered to dredge the Teesta River for Bangladesh. What are your thoughts on that?
India doesn't really believe in any third country interfering in its relationship with either China or Bangladesh. I think the problem about Teesta Water Treaty is primarily the bureaucratic hassle. And of course, it's not easy to, because they also have to take into consideration the people who are residing around the river. So definitely, I feel that there are bureaucratic red tapeism issues that both countries have to deal with. But I do believe for India's own interest and for Bangladesh interest as well, it's important that both countries start renegotiating Teesta Water Treaty and then such issues. And I do feel that people who are living near the border should not be impacted.
Okay, we're going to have to end it there. Thank you so much, Sampin Kwe and Sana Hashmi, for joining Taiwan Talks today. If you liked our show, please search for us on YouTube, give us a thumbs up and hit subscribe to our channel. Thank you for watching the show today. Stay safe and see you next time.